Greetings, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together for this opportunity to share with one another, not only the written text that's before us in a book, but also the text that each of us represents with our lives and our aspirations. We will read through the English translation of our of our Torah portion. I'll share with you a focused study about it, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation about it. This week, we are in the concluding portion of the book of Numbers, which is actually a double portion, Matot-Masei. If you have a copy of the Tanakh, you can follow along. It begins in the book of Numbers at chapter 30 with verse 2. I'll share with you, read out loud the opening verses to our portion, and then I'll offer others an opportunity to read as well if you'd like to do so. Before we begin, those who want to can unmute and we can recite together our blessing, giving thanks for the opportunity of sharing in this moment. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirshanu v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Book of Numbers, chapter 30, beginning with verse 2, I'll share with you these opening verses. Moses spoke to the heads of the Israelite tribes, saying, "This is what God has commanded. If one makes a vow to God or takes an oath imposing an obligation on themselves, they shall not break their pledge. They must carry out all that has crossed their lips. A woman makes a vow to God or assumes an obligation while still in her father's household by reason of her youth, and her father learns of her vow or her self-imposed obligation and offers no objection, all her vows shall stand and every self-imposed obligation shall stand. But if her father restrains her on the day he finds out, none of her vows or self-imposed obligations shall stand, and God will forgive her since her father restrained her. If she should marry while her vow or the commitment to which she bound herself is still in force, and her husband learns of it and offers no objection on the day he finds out, her vow shall stand and her self-imposed obligation shall stand. But if her husband restrains her on the day that he learns of it, and he thereby annuls her vow which was in force or the commitment to which she bound herself, and God will forgive her. The vow of a widow or of a divorced woman, however, whatever she has imposed on herself, shall be binding upon her. So too, if while in her husband's household, she makes a vow or imposes an obligation on herself by oath, and her husband learns of it, yet offers no objection, thus failing to restrain her, all her vows shall stand and her self-imposed obligation shall stand. But if her husband doesn't know them on the day he finds out, then nothing that has crossed her lips shall stand, whether vows or self-imposed obligations. Her husband has annulled them, and God will forgive her. Every vow and every sworn obligation of self-denial may be upheld by her husband or annulled by her husband. If her husband offers no objection from that day to the next, he has upheld all the vows or obligations she has assumed. He has upheld them by offering no objection on the day he found out. But if he annuls them after the day he finds out, he shall bear her guilt. Those are the laws that God enjoined upon Moses between a man and his wife, and between a father and his daughter, while in her father's household by reason of her youth. And now we're on chapter 31. And Richard, would you like to read a few verses?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Avenge the Israelite people on the Midianites, then you shall be gathered to your kin." Moses spoke to the people, saying, "Let men be picked out from among you for a campaign, and let them fall upon Midian to wreak the Lord's vengeance on Midian. You shall dispatch on the campaign 1,000 from every one of the tribes of Israel." So 1,000 from each tribe were furnished for the divisions of Israel, 12,000 picked for the campaign. Moses dispatched them on the campaign, 1,000 from each tribe, with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, serving as priest on the campaign, equipped with sacred utensils and the trumpets for sounding the blast. They took the field against Midian, as the Lord had commanded Moses, and they slew every male. Along with their other victims, They slew kings of Midian, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. They also put Balaam, son of Beor, to the sword.
Kath, would you like to continue there at verse 9?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The Israelites took the women and children of the Midianites captive and seized as booty all their beasts, all their herds, and all their wealth. And they destroyed by fire all the towns in which they were settled and their encampments. They gathered all the spoil and all the booty, man and beast, and they brought the captives, the booty, and the spoil to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the whole Israelite community at the camp in the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho. Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the chieftains of the community came out to meet them outside the camp. Moses became angry with the commanders of the army, the officers of thousands, and the officers of hundreds who had come back from the military campaign. Moses said to them, "You have spared every female, yet they are the very ones who at the bidding of Balaam induced the Israelites to trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, so that Hashem's community was struck by the plague. Now, therefore, slay every male among the children and slay also every woman who has known a man carnally, but spare every young woman who has not had carnal relations with a man."
Thank you. Anna, do you want to read this?
You shall then stay outside the camp 7 days, every one among you or among your captives who has slain a person or touched a corpse shall purify himself on the 3rd and 7th days. You shall also purify every cloth, every article of skin, everything made of goat's hair, and every object of wood. Eleazar the priest said to the troops who had taken part in the fighting, "This is the ritual law that God has enjoined upon Moses. Gold and silver, copper, iron, tin, and lead, any article that can withstand fire, these you shall pass through fire, and they shall be pure, except that they must be purified with water of lustration, and anything that cannot withstand fire, you must pass through water. On the 7th day, you shall wash your clothes and be pure, and after that, you may enter the camp."
Thank you so much. And June, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 25?
Thank you, Rabbi. The Lord said to Moses, "You and Eleazar the priest and the family heads of the community take an inventory of the booty that was captured, man and beast, and divide the booty equally between the combatants who engaged in the campaign and the rest of the community. You shall exact a levy for the Lord. In the case of the warriors who engaged in the campaign, 1 item in 500 of persons, oxen, asses, and sheep shall be taken from their half share and given to Eleazar the priest as a contribution to the Lord. And from the half share of the other Israelites, you shall withhold 1 in every 50 human beings, as well as cattle, asses, and sheep, all the animals, and give them to the Levites who attend to the duties of the Lord's tabernacle." Moses and Eleazar the priest did as the Lord commanded Moses. The amount of booty, other than the spoil that the troops had plundered, came to 675,000 sheep, 72,000 head of cattle, 61,000 asses, and a total of 32,000 human beings, namely the women who had not had carnal relations.
Thank you so much. And let me invite Dave. Would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 36?
Thus, the half share of those who had engaged in the campaign was as follows. The number of sheep was 337,500, and Adonai's levy from the sheep was 675. The cattle came to 36,000, from which Adonai's levy was 72. The asses came to 30,500, from which Adonai's levy was 61, and the number of human beings was 16,000, from which Adonai's levy was 32. Moses gave the contributions levied for Adonai to Eleazar the priest, as Adonai had commanded Moses. As for the half share of the other Israelites which Moses withdrew from those who had taken the field, that half share of community consisted of 337,500 sheep, 36,000 head of cattle, 30,500 asses, and 16,000 human beings. From this half share of the Israelites, Moses withheld 1 in every 50 humans and animals, and he gave them to the Levites who attended to the duties of Adonai's tabernacle, as Adonai has commanded Moses. The commanders of the troop divisions, the officers of thousands and the officers of hundreds approached Moses. They said to Moses, "Your servants have made a check of the warriors in our charge, and not one of us is missing. So we have brought as an offering to Adonai such articles as of gold as each of us came upon, armlets, bracelets, signet rings, earrings, and pendants, that expiation may be made for our persons before Adonai." Moses and Eleazar the priest accepted the gold from them, all kinds of wrought articles. All the gold that was offered by the officers of thousands and the officers of hundreds as a contribution to Adonai came to 16,750 shekels. But in the ranks of everyone kept his booty for himself. So Moses and Eleazar the priest accepted the gold from the officers of thousands and the officers of hundreds, and brought it to the tent of meeting as a reminder in behalf of the Israelites before Adonai.
Thank you, Dave. And now we're on chapter 32. And Justin, would you like to read a little bit starting there?
Thank you, Rabbi. The descendants of Reuben and Gad had an abundance of livestock, very numerous, and they saw the land of Jazar and the land of Gilead, and behold, the place was a place for livestock. The descendants of Gad and the descendants of Reuben came, and they spoke to Moses and to Eleazar the Cohen, and to the princes of the community, saying, Adaroth, Dibon, Jazer, and Nimrah, Heshbon, Eleale, Sebam, Nebo, and Bayon. The land that the Lord struck down before the congregation of Israel is a land for livestock, and your servants have livestock. They said, if it pleases you, let this land be given to your servants as a heritage. Do not take us across the Jordan. Thereupon Moses said to the descendants of Gad and the descendants of Reuben, shall your brethren go to war while you stay here? Why do you discourage the children of Israel from crossing over to the land which the Lord has given them? This is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. They went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, and they discouraged the children of Israel from crossing into the land which the Lord has given them. The anger of the Lord flared on that day, and he swore, saying, none of the men from the age of 20 years and over who came out of Egypt will see the land that I swore to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, for they did not follow me wholeheartedly, except for Caleb, the son of Shephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they followed me, the Lord, wholeheartedly. The anger of the Lord flared against Israel, and he made them wander in the desert for 40 years, until the entire generation who had done evil in the eyes of the Lord had died out. And behold, you have now risen in place of your fathers as a society of sinful people, to add to the wrathful anger of the Lord against Israel. If you turn away from following him, he will leave you in the desert again, and you will destroy this entire people.
Thank you so much. Mark, would you like to read a little bit, starting at page 16? Verse 16, rather. And you'll need to unmute, Mark. Thank you.
Then they stepped up to him and said, "We will build here sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children. And we will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, while our children stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until every one of the Israelites is in possession of his portion. But we will not have a share with them in the territory beyond the Jordan, for we have received our share on the east side of the Jordan." Moses said to them, "If you do this, if you go to battle as shock troops at the instance of Adonai, and every shock fighter among you crosses the Jordan at the instance of Adonai, until he has dispossessed his enemies before him, and the land has been subdued at the instance of Adonai, and then you return, you shall be clear before the Lord and before Israel, and this land shall be your holding under Adonai. But if you do not do so, you will have sinned against Adonai, and know that your sin will overtake you. Build towns for yourself, for your children, and sheepfolds for your flocks, but do what you have promised." The Gadites and the Reubenites answered Moses, "Your servants will do as my Lord commands. Our children, our wives, our flocks, and all our other livestock will stay behind in the towns of Gilead, while your servants, all those recruited for war, cross over at the instance of Adonai to engage in battle, as my Lord orders." Then Moses gave instructions concerning them to Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the family heads of the Israelite tribes. Moses said to them, "If every shock fighter among the Gadites and the Reubenites crosses the Jordan with you to do battle at the instance of Adonai, and the land is subdued before you, you shall give them the land of Gilead as a holding. But if they do not cross over with you as shock troops, they shall receive holdings among you in the land of Canaan."
Thank you so much, Mark. Jerry, do you want to do any reading this evening?
No, I do not have the
Okay.
text handy, but I'll be better prepared next time. Thank
Lovely,
you.
Jerry. Thank you so much. So let me invite Jim. If you'd like to do any reading, you could start at verse 31. And when you're ready, Jim, you'll need to unmute.
I'm sorry, I thought I did.
Yeah.
The Gadites and the Reubenites said in reply, "Whatever Adonai has spoken concerning your servants, that we will do. We ourselves will cross over as shock troops at the instance of Adonai into the land of Canaan, and we shall keep our hereditary holdings across the Jordan." So Moses assigned to them, to the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the half tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of King Og of Bashan, the land with its various cities and the territories of their surrounding towns. The Gadites rebuilt Dibon, Adaroth, Aurora, Atroth Shapan, Jazer, Jogbehah, Beth Nimrah, and Beth Haran as fortified towns or as enclosures for flocks. The Reubenites rebuilt Hashan Elialai, Kirithan, Nebo, Baal, Meon, some names being changed, and the Samah. They gave their own names in towns that they rebuilt. The descendants of Machir, son of Manasseh, went to Gilead and captured it, disposing the Amorites who were there. So Moses gave Gilead to Machir, son of Manasseh, and he settled there. Jair, son of Manasseh, went and captured their villages, which he returned. Havoth, Jair, and Nobah went and captured Kenath and its dependencies, renaming it Nobah after himself.
Thank you so much, Jim. Let me invite Robert. Would you like to read a little bit starting at chapter 33 with verse 1?
Yes, thank you. These are the journeys of the children of Israel, which went forth out of the land of Egypt, with their armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. And Moses wrote their goings out according to their journeys by the commandment of the Lord. And these are their journeys according to their goings out. And they departed from Ramesses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month. On the morrow after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with an high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians. For the Egyptians buried all their firstborn, which the Lord had smitten among them. Upon their gods also the Lord executed judgments. And the children of Israel removed from Ramesses and pitched in Succoth. And they departed from Succoth and pitched in Etham, which is in the edge of the wilderness. And they removed from Etham and turned again unto Piharoth, which is before Baal-Zephon, and they pitched before Migdol. And they departed from before Pitharoth and passed through the midst of the sea into the wilderness and went 3 days' journey in the wilderness of Etham and pitched in Marah. And they removed from Marah and came unto Elim, and in Elim were 12 fountains of water and 70 palm trees, and they pitched there. And they removed from Elim and encamped by the Red Sea. And they removed from the Red Sea and encamped in the wilderness of Sin. And they took their journey out of the wilderness of Sin and encamped in Dakkah. And they departed from Dakkah and encamped in Alush. And they removed from Alush and encamped in Rephidim, where was no water for the people to drink. And they departed from Rephidim and pitched in the wilderness of Sinai. And they removed from the desert of Sinai and pitched in Kibroth Hattaavah. And they departed from Kibroth Hattaavah and encamped in Hazeroth. And they departed from Hazeroth and pitched in Rithmah. And they departed from Rithmah and pitched in Ramon Perez. And they departed from Ramon Perez and pitched in Libnah. And they removed from Libnah and pitched in Risah. And they journeyed in from Risah and pitched in Kehelah. And they went from Kehelah and pitched in Mount Shaper. And they removed from Mount Shaper and encamped in Haradah. And they removed from Haradah and pitched in Makaloth. And they removed from Makaloth and encamped in Tahath. And they departed from Tahath and pitched in Tara. And they removed from Tara and pitched in Mithkah. And they went from Mithkah and pitched in Hashmonah. And they departed from Hashmonah and encamped in Mazarah. And they departed from Mazarah and pitched in Benejacon. And they removed from Benejacon and encamped in Haragadad. And they went from Haragadad and pitched in Jotbathah, and they removed from Jotbathah and encamped in Ebronah. And they departed from Ebronah and encamped in Eziongabar, and they removed from Eziongabar and pitched in the wilderness of Zin, which is Kadesh. And they removed from Kadesh and pitched in Mount Hor in the edge of the land of Edom. And Aaron the priest went into the Mount of Hor at the commandment of the Lord and died there in the 40th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt in the first day of the 5th month. And Aaron was 123 years old when he died in Mount Hor. And King Arad, the Canaanite, which dwelt in the south in the land of Canaan, heard of the coming of the children of Israel.
Thank you so much, Robert. Lovely, lovely reading. Thank you. Let me invite Rose, if you'd like to continue there at verse 41. And you'll need to unmute. Thank you.
Okay, 41. Jair, son of Manasseh, went and captured their villages, which he renamed Havot Jair. And Noba went and captured Kenath and its dependencies, renaming it Noba after himself. These were the marches of the Israelites who started out from the land of Egypt, troop by troop, in the charge of Moses and Aaron.
Let me just make sure. Did you start at verse 41 of chapter 33?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. They set out from Mount Horn and camped at Zalmona. They set out from Zalmona and camped at Punon. They set out from Punon and camped at Oboth. They set out from Oboth and camped at Ye-Avarim in the territory of Moab. They set out from Iyim and encamped at Dibon Gad. They set out from Almon Diblathaim and encamped in the hills of Abarim before Nebo. They set out from the hills of Abarim and encamped in the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho. They encamped by the Jordan from Beth Jeshimoth as far as Abel Shittim in the steppes of Moab. In the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho, Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall dispossess all the inhabitants of the land. You shall destroy all their figured objects. You shall destroy all their molten images, and you shall demolish all their cult places. And you shall take possession of the land and settle in that, for I have assigned the land for you to possess. You shall apportion the land among yourselves by lot, clan by clan. With larger groups, increase the share. With smaller groups, reduce the share. Wherever the lot falls for it, that shall be its location. You shall have your portions according to your ancestral tribes. But if you do not dispossess the inhabitants of the land, those whom you allow to remain shall be stings in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They shall harass you in the land in which you live, so that I will do to you what I plan to do to them."
Thank you so much, Rose. Jay, would you like to read a little bit starting at the start of chapter 34?
Thank you, Rabbi. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Instruct the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you as your portion, the land of Canaan with its various boundaries. Your southern sector shall extend from the wilderness of Zin alongside Edom. Your southern boundary shall start on the east from the tip of the Dead Sea. Your boundary shall then turn to pass south of the ascent of Akrabidon and continue to Zin, and its limit shall be south of Kadesh Barnea, reaching Hazar Adar and continuing to Asmon. From Asmon, the boundary shall turn towards the Wadi of Egypt and terminate at the sea. For the western boundary, you shall have the coast of the Great Sea that shall serve as your western boundary. This shall be your northern boundary. Draw a line from the Great Sea to Mount Hor. From Mount Hor, draw a line to Lebo Hamath, and let the boundary reach Zedad. The boundary shall then run to Zephron and terminate at Hazar Enan. That shall be your northern boundary. For your eastern boundary, you shall draw a line from Hazar Enan to Shaphan,
From Shaphan, the boundary shall descend to Riblah on the east side of Ain. From there, the boundary shall continue downward and abut on the eastern slopes of the Sea of Kinneret. The boundary shall then descend along the Jordan and terminate at the Dead Sea. That shall be your land, as defined by its boundaries on all sides. Continue.
Please.
Moses instructed the Israelites, saying, "This is the land you are to receive by lot as your hereditary portion, which Hashem has commanded to be given to the 9.5 tribes. For the Reubenite tribe by its ancestral houses, the Gadite tribe by its ancestral houses, and the half tribe of Manasseh have already received their portions. Those 2.5 tribes have received their portions across the Jordan, opposite Jericho on the east, the Orient side." Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "These are the names of the men through whom the land shall be apportioned for you. Eleazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun, and you shall also take a chieftain from each tribe through whom the land shall be apportioned. These are the names of the men. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb son of Jephunneh. From the Simeonite tribe, Samuel son of Ammihud. From the tribe of Benjamin, Elidad son of Shalom. From the Danite tribe, a chieftain, Bukki son of Yogli. For the descendants of Joseph, from the Masonite tribe, a chieftain, Haniel son of Ephod, and from the Ephraimite tribe, a chieftain, Kemuel son of Shiftan. From the Zebulunite tribe, a chieftain, Elisaphan son of Parnach. From the Issacharite tribe, a chieftain, Paltiel son of Azan. From the Asherite tribe, a chieftain, Ahihud son of Shelomi. From the Naphthalite tribe, a chieftain, Pedahel son of Ammihud. It was these whom Adonai designated to allot portions to the Israelites in the land of Canaan.
Thank you so much. And Catherine, would you like to read a little bit at the start of chapter 35?
Thank you, Rabbi. Adonai spoke to Moses in the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho, saying, "Instruct the Israelite people to assign out of the holdings apportioned to them towns for the Levites to dwell in. You shall also assign to the Levites pasture land around their towns. The towns shall be theirs to dwell in, and the pasture shall be for the cattle they own and all their other beasts. The town pasture that you are to assign to the Levites shall extend 1,000 cubits outside the town wall all around. You shall measure off 2,000 cubits outside the town on the east side, 2,000 on the south side, 2,000 on the west side, and 2,000 on the north side, with the town in the center. That shall be the pasture for their towns. The towns that you assign to the Levites shall comprise the 6 cities of refuge that you are to designate for a manslayer to flee to which you shall add 42 towns. Thus the total of the towns that you shall assign to the Levites shall be 48 towns with their pasture. In assigning towns from the holdings of the Israelites, take more from the larger groups and less from the smaller, so that each assigns towns to the Levites in proportion to the share it receives." Adonai spoke further to Moses, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you cross the Jordan in the land of Canaan, you shall provide yourselves with places to serve you as cities of refuge to which a manslayer who has killed a person unintentionally may flee. The cities shall serve you as a refuge from the avenger, so that the manslayer may not die unless he has stood trial before the assembly. The towns that you thus assign shall be 6 cities of refuge in all. 3 cities shall be designated beyond the Jordan, and the other 3 shall be designated in the land of Canaan. They shall serve as cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall serve the Israelites and the resident aliens among them for refuge, so that anyone who kills a person unintentionally may flee there. Anyone, however, who strikes another with an iron object so that death results is a murderer. The murderer must be put to death. If he struck him with a stone tool that could cause death, and death resulted, he is a murderer. The murderer must be put to death. Similarly, if the object with which he struck him was a wooden tool that could cause death, and death resulted, he is a murderer. The murderer must be put to death. The blood avenger himself shall put the murderer to death. It is he who shall put him to death upon encounter. So too, if he pushed him in hate or hurled something at him on purpose and death resulted, or if he struck him with his hand in enmity and death resulted, the assailant shall be put to death. He is a murderer. The blood avenger shall put the murderer to death upon encounter.
Thank you, Catherine. We're now at verse 22. But if you pushed him without malice aforethought, or hurled any object at him unintentionally, or inadvertently dropped upon him any deadly object of stone, and death resulted, though he was not an enemy of his and did not seek his harm, in such cases the assembly shall decide between the slayer and the blood avenger. The assembly shall protect the manslayer from the blood avenger, and the assembly shall restore him to the city of refuge to which he fled, and there he shall remain until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the sacred oil. But if the manslayer ever goes outside the limits of the city of refuge to which he has fled, and the blood avenger comes upon him outside the limits of his city of refuge, and the blood avenger kills the manslayer, there is no blood guilt on his account. For he must remain inside his city of refuge until the death of the high priest. After the death of the high priest, the manslayer may return to his land holding. Such shall be your law of procedure throughout the ages in all your settlements. If anyone kills a person, the manslayer may be executed only on the evidence of witnesses. The testimony of a single witness against a person shall not suffice for a sentence of death. You may not accept a ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of a capital crime. He must be put to death. Nor may you accept ransom in lieu of a flight to a city of refuge, enabling one to return to live on his land before the death of the priest. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and the land can have no expiation for blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in which I myself abide, for I, Adonai, abide among the Israelite people. We're now at the start of chapter 36. Richard, do you want to read there?
Thank you, Rabbi. 36. The family heads in the clan of the descendants of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, one of the Josephite clans, came forward and appealed to Moses and the chieftains, family heads of the Israelites. They said, "The Lord commanded my Lord to assign the land to the Israelites as shares by lot. And my Lord was further commanded by the Lord to assign the share of our kinsman Zelophehad to his daughters. Now, if they marry persons from another Israelite tribe, their share shall be cut off from our ancestral portion and be added to the portion of the tribe into which they marry. Thus our allotted portion will be diminished. And even when the Israelites observe the Jubilee, their share will be added to that of the tribe into which they marry, and their share will be cut off from the ancestral portion of our tribe." So Moses, at the Lord's bidding, instructed the Israelites, saying, "The plea of the Josephite tribe is just. This is what the Lord had commanded concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. They may marry anyone they wish, provided they marry into a clan of their father's tribe. No inheritance of the Israelites may pass over from one tribe to another. But the Israelite must remain bound each to the ancestral portion of his tribe. Every daughter among the Israelite tribes who inherits a share must marry someone from a clan of her father's tribe, in order that every Israelite may keep his ancestral share. Thus, no inheritance shall pass over from one tribe to another, but the Israelite tribe shall remain bound, each to its portion. The daughters of Zelophehad did as the Lord had commanded Moses. Malchah, Izrah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah, Zelophehad's daughters, were married to sons of their uncles. marrying into clans of descendants of Manasseh, son of Joseph. And so their share remained in the tribe of their father's clan. These are the commandments and regulations that the Lord enjoined upon the Israelites through Moses on the steppes of Moab at the Jordan near Jericho.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone, for taking us to the end of the book of Numbers. And since it is the end of a book of Torah, we have a special blessing that we recite. If you want to unmute at this point, we can recite it together, which is Hazak, be strong, and we shall be strengthened. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. I'd like to share with you a focused study about it, and we'll have our communal conversation about our portion. So, as I mentioned, with this week's portion, which is actually a double portion, we come to not only the end of the book of Numbers, we really come to the end of the march of the Israelites, because they are now at the border, ready to cross over into the promised land. And the next book, the book of Deuteronomy, really does not have much in the way of narrative in it, and it doesn't have any actual human action or dynamics involved. It consists primarily of Moses reflecting back and retelling the story of their whole journey, as well as reminding them of various legal obligations, laws, and rituals and rites that they are obligated to follow. So with this portion of the book of Numbers, we come to the end of the journey, so to speak. And so as we began to think about this ending, I thought it's interesting to me that the title for this week's two portions, Matot and Masei, are words that are key words in the very beginning of the book of Numbers. And so on our study sheet, I have those. Here in this week's portion, we have Moses spoke to the heads of the Israelite tribes, Matot, and in the very beginning chapter of the book of Numbers, we read, associated with you shall be a man from each tribe, Mate. And as regards the words Masei, which means marches, here in this week's portion, we read, these were the marches, Masei, of the Israelites. And the very opening of the book of Numbers, we have this verse that says, and so they marched, Nasu, each with his clan. So I'm fascinated that as the key words that close out the book of Numbers are the key words that also opened up the book of Numbers. And so the ending of their journey, in a sense, is evocative of the beginning of their journey. And so I want to explore what that might mean just as a literary device to be reminded at the end, to be reminded of your beginning. Now, we know, as we've been reading through this together, that a lot happens between the opening of the book of Numbers and its closing. There's a lot of what I call stumbling by the people. There are complaints. There's an actually armed insurrection, rebellion. There's a collapse of the key leadership among the Israelites. There's expressions of selfishness. There's expressions of arrogance. There's expressions of impulsive passions that are played out, some of which lead to violence. So all this stumbling that happens along this journey, I think, is an important lesson about what it means to be marching from slavery to freedom, from constriction to expanse. That in a sense, it is important to stumble over all these negative qualities, all these weaknesses within us in order to reach this point where they're ready to cross over and assume the responsibility of becoming fully developed human beings capable of governing themselves. So this notion about stumbling is an actually interesting concept as it appears in Jewish literature, in both the Talmud and in commentary and in midrash. So in number 2, I have here from the Talmud, from Masechet Sanhedrin, a quote from the book of Leviticus, which is, "And they shall stumble over one another." If you remember the context in which that verse comes up is God is saying, look, if you follow this path, if you follow this way of life, you will overcome all your enemies. However, if you stray from this path, if you break from this ethical way of living, then you are going to be terrified. You will live a life of fear, anxiety, and terror. And you will flee, even though no one's chasing you. You will stumble over one another. And so here's what the rabbis in the Talmud say about that verse. But isn't it written, "And they shall stumble upon one another"? And the rabbis say, you should read this as they stumble because of one another. And this teaches that all Israelites are responsible for one another, meaning that one's own individual failure has an impact on the whole community. And therefore, the whole community needs to watch out for one another, in a sense, needs to be a guarantor, be responsible for others. And our medieval commentator Rashi is also going to comment on this particular verse from Leviticus. And this is a continuation of that verse from Leviticus, as if from before a sword, meaning you will be frightened and you'll flee as if a sword has been placed before you. And so Rashi says, as if they are fleeing from before killers, for there is fright in their heart, and they are always under the impression that someone is pursuing them. So it is written, they will stumble, each one over his brother, meaning one stumbles through the offense of another, for all of Israel are guarantors for one another. So here Rashi is making it clear what is more compacted in the reading from the Talmud, which is because all of us impact one another's lives, it is important as a community that we protect one another, care for one another, help correct one another, and ensure that we are being responsible for one another. There, in number 3, we have this fascinating story that also is about stumbling. And here's the background to the story, which is just was one line that I've produced from the Talmud for you. The rabbis are engaged at this point in the Talmud talking about a very strange hypothetical concept, which is what happens if a woman, an Israelite woman, is a slave, and in fact, what happens if she's a slave to 2 different owners? And what happens if one of the owners says, now you're free? So is the woman slave? How can she be half free and half slave? Can she marry? Can the slave part of her marry? No. But can the free part of herself marry? Yes. But what happens then as she's a slave? What happens in that marriage? So they have this long, fascinating intellectual discussion about this hypothetical concept of a slave who's turns out to be owned by 2 different people, one of whom frees her and the other continues her as a slave. So the rabbis get into this argument about one another, and they're raising these different answers. And at one point, one of the rabbis, Rav Huna, takes a certain position, and then another rabbi offers up a counter position, and Rav Huna reconsiders his position. And he says, you know what? You're right. I was wrong. But what happens in the story is he doesn't merely say that within the setting of the yeshiva, of their study hall. He goes out and he hires an interpreter, someone who can re-articulate the fact that he has just acknowledged that he is wrong, because he wants to make sure the whole community hears both his apology and his acknowledgement that he was wrong in his opinion. And he says this: a person does not understand, or literally in Hebrew it says stand on, words of Torah unless one stumbles on them. Meaning, So Rav Huna is saying, I was wrong, and it didn't become clear to me what the true meaning of the Torah message was, except the fact that I made a mistake. It's only by making a mistake that I understood and got clarified about what the correct answer was. So this notion about stumbling has to do with, in this literature, a sense of correction, the courage to admit that one is wrong, and also the importance of the community looking out for one another. So here we are in this story of the Israelites stumbling through from the beginning of their march until the end of their march. And after all this stumbling, they get to the end of their march, and the Hebrew evokes for them that they are back, in fact, at a beginning. But of course, it's not back at the beginning as it was, because they have transformed themselves through their stumbling, through their experiencing the weak part of themselves, the harmful part of themselves, and have become, hopefully, a more refined character. So here's the way our poet T.S. Eliot puts it on number 4. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. For the painting for today, I'd like you to take a look at the image at the very top of the study sheet, which is a painting by Larry Rivers. And Larry Rivers was born to Ukrainian Jewish immigrants, and his birth name was Yitzhak Loiza Grossberg. And Yitzhak Loiza became a jazz musician. He was performing with a band in a nightclub around the age of 17. And the MC, for whatever reason, introduced this band as, and here's Larry Rivers and the Mudcats. And Yitzhak Loiza Grossberg said, that sounds good to me. And so he kept the name Larry Rivers. In his band, there was a member of his band who was married to a woman named Janet Freilicher, who was an artist. And she said to Larry Rivers, you should try painting. He did, and he became a very successful painter. But he became a painter in the late 40s, early 50s, at a time when the dominant art movement in the United States, which eventually became the dominant art movement in the world, was abstract expressionism, which is a form of art that erases the human figure from the canvas, thinking that what's more important is the artist's emotional, psychological, and spiritual experiences. And to be able to replicate that on a canvas, you need to do so in an abstract way so that people don't get attached to thinking they know what they're looking at, but they have to engage the painting. And so it was bright colors and all kinds of amorphous forms and so forth. Larry Rivers, however, was someone who believed in the value of the figure and believed in the value of storytelling. And so in the face of the dominant art world at the time, he painted human figures, for which he would hang out in Greenwich Village, and he would go to this bar in Greenwich Village where all these artists hung out. And he would walk in, and he said, I walked in after doing some of my paintings, and I was booed. He was booed by these abstract expression artists who felt that he was he was taking things backward by reinstituting the human figure into a painting. So here's one of his first paintings, is called Washington Crossing the Delaware. And as you may know, this is a very famous painting by the German-American painter Louis. And if you remember, Washington is standing up in the boat as it's crossing the Delaware. And Larry Rivers looked at that and he said, well, that's ridiculous. Who on Christmas Eve is going to be in a cold winter's day in the middle of a river is going to be standing up. That's ridiculous. And so he paints the image that you see here. And so on the one hand, he's ridiculing this classic painting as being overly pompous and unrealistic, a painting that portrayed Washington as another Napoleon. And Larry was he was a regular guy, and he was going to do what a regular guy would do in the middle of a cold, wet boat ride. You'd sit down. And so here he's on one hand poking fun at the classic picture, but the fact that in the middle of this ascendancy of abstract expressionism, which was hailed as the great new art form, the fact that he placed human figures on his canvas was in effect an act of courage. And in fact, it was a way of honoring classical art, even though he reinterpreted that classical art. So in a way, what Larry Rivers is doing in his work, in fact, behind me is an etching that, a lithograph that Larry Rivers did in 1963 for the first New York Film Festival. So, and up in my study, I have another piece that he did of Esther and Haman. And he's a fascinating guy. He continued to play jazz music, and he did this huge triptych piece called The History of Matzah, the story of the Jewish people. And at the opening, where that was exhibited in 1984, I believe it was, at the Jewish Museum in New York, he played the saxophone during the opening of his art exhibit of the history of matzah. So he's a very intriguing guy who loved playing the scamp and the rascal and the bad boy. But here he was reaching back into classical forms and reinterpreting them for the contemporary moment. And so I thought it fit nicely in the sense of reaching back into the past in order to move forward. But what you bring back from the past is really not what existed in the past. It's something that he has reinterpreted. So with that, I would love to extend our conversation, if everyone's willing, a little bit of extra time, because we had this double portion, and have our conversation. So let me call upon Mark, and then Rose, and then Catherine. Please, Mark.
Thank you. This has been a long journey tonight. And it actually started earlier this week with your post about nostalgia. And I think tonight, it first struck me, I think, when Robert was reading about all of the different travels and the places that were enumerated. I don't recall if it was expressed in such specificity in the past. Maybe it was, I may have missed it. But this is the first time I think I've read this portion where I felt like I'd been on that journey. And the other thing, and I hope I don't embarrass Richard, but at the very end, when Richard read the last sentence, I thought I caught some emotion there. And Richard, I don't know if I did, but
You did.
I felt like he was on that journey with me. And to me, that nostalgia just really was brought forth by your emotionality, Richard. So I want to thank you for that, for making it real. The third thing I wanted to say is just, for me tonight, this is a nostalgic night because I have a very dear friend from Wisconsin, Robert, that I've known for 35 years, and I've known Jerry Cohn, a new participant, probably longer than that. So for me, bringing the past into the present and allowing us to reinterpret it in today is very, very special. So I want to thank you all for that.
Beautiful, Mar. And I just want to say, the journey itself is important, and companions are what make it precious. So thank you for mentioning your companions. Thank you. And Catherine, please share with us.
Well, I actually have a question. I'm puzzled by in Parshat 31, we see that 1 in 50 human beings are to be withheld. And as part of this withholding process with Eliezer the priest. And then we find out in the next, for me, the next page, that they're namely women, these human beings. And so I'm wondering what happened to those women. I'm wondering what it means that they're.
We lost you.
Okay,
Repeat
you
that.
had a
Please
little
repeat
buffering
it.
problem, but maybe
Oh.
maybe you did end there. Yeah. You want to know what that means? What happened to the women?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I don't know.
I'm
What-
puzzled by this.
Just what could you imagine? What do you imagine is happening here?
Well, it seems as though they're supposed to be part of some kind of sacred space to begin with, because they haven't had carnal relations. But are they to serve?
This is lovely. I'm not really sure. So now I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued. I'm going to delve into it, and perhaps you can as well, and we'll see what we both come up with. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for
All right.
offering that up as a provocation. Let me
Okay.
invite Rose and then Jerry and Robert.
Okay, Catherine, I think there's another section of the Torah where they talk about the woman who was taken in battle and that she's allowed to mourn her family for a month and shave her head. And then I think she becomes a concubine. And I think that that's really what happened. That's why they had to be virgins, because they were going to get taken as concubines. And it's this whole thing about if the man doesn't like her, what to do. And I think that that speaks to that. But I want to start off by saying my mother and my aunt grew up with Jerry Rivers and with Leonard Bernstein. And Jerry Rivers was considered a schmendrick and a luftmensch when he was younger. So it's nice that he turned out well. And another Jew, Simone Signoret, said, nostalgia isn't what it used to be. And Paul Simon, another Jew, has a thing. Do you remember the song Slip Sliding Away? Said, the nearer the destination, the more you're slip sliding away. So I think that that plays into the stumbling. But I wanted to point out something about the Chalitzim that are in 32, where Reuben and Gad are talking about being Chalitzim, being the shock troops, and going into the land. And so I looked up what Chalitzim was, and apparently the modern meaning is actually Jewish pioneers, the people, the Zionists who went in at the turn of the 21st century, like to clean out the swamps and all that stuff. They were called the Chalitzim, so that they went in not to initially take the land, but to reclaim the land. So it's kind of interesting that they took this biblical phrase and used it for them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for bringing that notion about the Chalutzim. Yes, to go in as the first to go in to reclaim the land and to make it possible for others, the ones to go first, and making it possible for others to be able to settle there. That's beautiful. Thank you. Let me invite Jerry, please unmute and share with us.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Moskowitz. I'm a little confused. God spoke to Moses quite a bit, it sounds like. Did God speak to anybody else? Or was Moses somehow special to God?
Well, we read a portion where Moses becomes a little overwhelmed, and God says, I'll pour some of the spirit I poured into you, I'll pour into some others. And so as leaders from the Israelite nation, it says that the spirit poured into them, and they began to somehow prophesy. They began to speak words of insight, if you will. But we don't have, and others here in the group can correct me if I'm wrong, instances where the text says so-and-so spoke to, at least after the book of Genesis, spoke to one of these individuals who's now been freed from Egypt. Of course, we see that in the book of Genesis many times where God does engage and speak with individuals. So thank you for pointing that out. Did you want to like raise a point about that, or just reflect on that, or anything?
Well, no, Moses' brother Aaron, sister Miriam are considered prophets. And I was just wondering why they didn't hear it also. Why didn't they hear God's word also?
Good point.
We don't know that they didn't hear God's word. What we have is a text kind of that in a sense it's, I don't know if I want to say it's a partial text, but we read it and we help fill it out. So the black letter of the text, again, I'll invite others to share their perspectives, but the black letter of the text, you're right, except for when Miriam and Aaron are being chastised by God for having criticized Moses. And then there's a speaking to them there. Yeah. So you want to say something about that in particular, Richard, before I move on to Robert?
Go, Robert.
Okay, Robert, please.
I always have to unmute. That's why I look like that. Thank you so much for another lovely evening. You know, Catherine's point, I think, was answered very well by Rose, but the first thing that came to my mind, this life is just a small chapter, as I understand it, of our existence. Ultimately, the grace of God is going to surround each one of us. And, you know, injustice and so forth is so difficult to understand. But there's a verse I love. It says, God rewardeth beyond measure those who endure with patience. And so those souls who have been the recipients of injustice, grave or otherwise, if they can overcome that, they become immensely strong. And I think, you know, if we look at the Holocaust, for example, which is something we're all familiarity with, some of those souls that came out of that, despite the horrific injustice, came out immensely strong, made tremendous contributions. The other thing I want to say, I'm looking at the matzah, Larry Rivers matzah. You know, when you mention these things, I get on the internet, I have a big screen here. What a piece of art. And I'll tell you what I love about this guy. He's passionate, he's courageous, and he's not willing to say art is what someone else says it is. You know, and here, you know, we think of artists as being free thinking and so forth. You know, the great challenge of humanity is what? Is to be open and searching for truth and recognizing there's actually something called diversity. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, wow, what a piece of art this is. So, and of course, his other piece was very nice as well. But it's really impressive. Yeah, it's big on my screen.
Can you imagine? You want to be an artist. You want to not just express, but I think most artists also want to be seen or heard. They want to be engaged with. So imagine that you walk into a bar where all these really famous and important artists are, Mark Rothko and William de Kooning and these other artists, and they boo you. I mean, and you continue to paint. That takes what we call chutzpah. It takes a certain degree of either compulsion or courage, however you want to define it. So thank you for bringing all that.
And by the way, there are scientists who have to have chutzpah because there was a huge amount of prejudice in the scientific community. If you get right down to it, if you do not believe in the standard model of physics in some universities and you want to do a PhD program and you're interested in string theory, and these are things that have actually happened, you have to go somewhere else.
Mhm.
So, and all the prejudice against women that, RNA, I guess DNA, there was a woman who was the very heart of that. So chutzpah is a good word. Good word. Thank you.
Let me go, Richard.
A couple of little things. Number one, I can imagine a scene in which he goes into the bar and everybody boos at him and he says,
Thank you.
see, I'm right, thank you. And stumbling, didn't we come across the word stumbling when Jacob stumbled on the rock?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and you use the word instance, an instance of the Lord. And I noticed here that in 32:20, he's talking to Moses, but at the instance of the Lord, until he dispossessed them at the Jordan. Moses said to them, if you do this, if you go to battle of the shock troops, at the instance of the Lord, and every shock fighter among you crosses the Jordan at the instance of the Lord, and until he has disposed his enemies. And I wondered what that meant. At the instance of the Lord. Is there something going to happen in that instant that is going to propel them? And is there some transfer of energy that the Lord is inducing them to go forward, much as the ark goes forward in that little piece in earlier in Numbers, the word instance. And then finally, I just wanted to thank someone for saying that I was choked up. And I want to say the reason was because we're getting to the end of the chapter, and I realized that this is the 36th verse. And I just thought of the Lamed Vavniks who hold the world together. And that's the end. That's the last number in the book of Numbers.
Awesome.
And that's what it all is about, the 36 wise men who, the Tzaddiks, who keep stuff together. And every once in a while, only one person, it's all on one person's shoulders, and you never know when it's going to be your turn.
Wow.
But the 36 there was what got me.
Well, everyone had such rich comments, so let me try and just pull together some things here. And I'd like to do that by going back to the verse from Leviticus that is commented on by Rashi and within the Talmud, because this notion about they're going to stumble because of one another, they'll flee as if before a sword. That section also contains the word they'll flee as if by a driven leaf. And I want to thank Mark Thompson for leading a wonderful discussion of the novel as a driven leaf. So the whole notion, that feeling about a driven leaf is, first of all, the novel is about a story about someone who has begun to question his heritage, his origins, the validity of it, its meaningfulness within the contemporary world at the time, and so begins to lose a sense of not only certainty, but more importantly, a sense of connection with a community. And that is what causes I think the real meaning behind this phrase, to be frightened as a driven leaf, to run even though people are not pursuing you. And it is a condition that affects, I think, many of us at different points in our lives, where we are driven by some kind of anxiety that we haven't achieved what we should achieve, or that we don't have what we should have, or we don't understand what we need to understand, and that anxiety kind of exacerbates a sense of that we are alone in the world, that we're not attached to anyone or anything, that gives us grounding and rootedness and gives comprehension to our existence, a sense of purpose to our existence. So what we're encountering here is that sense of anxiety can be resolved by the notion that what the Israelites are going through here, they're going from one place to the next, and they end up, in a sense, as a literary device back at the beginning. And the message seems to be that what we need to do, where we need to be, what we need to know is something that's always been with us. It's not outside of us. It's not far away. It's not something else. And that is what makes Somewhere Over the Rainbow such a Jewish song and such a Jewish movie. Which of course, the music, the lyrics of all those songs were written by Jews. So because they are bringing into the novel that the movie was made from, that Jewish story, that you think that you don't fit in. You think that you're missing something. You think that it's somewhere else that you need to be. You need to be someone else. And the message ultimately is, it's always been with you. It's just a matter of discovering it. And as in the movie, you have to go on this journey, encounter all kinds of crises, encounter all kinds of fears, discover weaknesses within yourself. And then finally you realize, I've always had the capacity to be who I need to be. And as in Dorothy, with her companions, the journey, as Rashi and the Talmud tell us, the journey is made more meaningful when we are part of companionship that gives us a sense that we are loved, that we're cared for, that we're recognized, and that we have a community that we are a part of. And I want to thank each and every one of you for helping to make that kind of a community that makes my life worthwhile. Thank you so much. God bless you. Look
I
forward
just
to-
saw that musical Sunday.
See you next week.
Place like home.
Thank you.